This is Dewan L. Hearn, more affectionately known as the Moon, and this is the Moon Equals Wrestling podcast. So I did an episode on the McMahon Netflix special, and with the special being 6 parts, the conversation that I had, which features Brian Haas, was about 4 hours long, 340. Uh, I know you don't want to sit through a 3 hour, 40-minute conversation I have about a documentary. So I'm splitting it up into multiple episodes. So this will go probably before each of the different parts and serve as sort of a content warning. Obviously, we're discussing Mr. McMahon. We understand the allegations that he's under right now. With that being said, the documentary does cover things that are sensitive, such as rape and sexual assault and sexual misconduct, and at one point suicide. So if any of these things are you're sensitive to, then maybe these aren't the episodes that you should watch, and you should probably definitely avoid the McMahon special. Otherwise, enjoy the different parts of this episode. Also, another fair warning: we are discussing someone who has some very negative allegations against them, and we are going to objectively look at the special and McMahon's presentation throughout the special as a whole. So while some of the things we say are complimentary and positive of Mr. McMahon as it relates to that part of the episode or that part of the series, please understand that nothing that we say, me or Mr. Haas, is a is giving a thumbs up or an okay to his obviously terrible behavior. We do not condone the behaviors of Mr. McMahon or anyone else mentioned in any of his various lawsuits. So please understand that and enjoy the show. And then we have episode 2, which was called Heat. And again, if there's anyone new to wrestling watching this, heat is a term that we use for hatred or anger and frustration
I
that we
think it's
have.
a so I always had said I think it's a term for engagement, right? Because like
I could
heat,
see that translation, yeah.
yeah, because heat is not a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
In fact, heat is a very good thing in
Heat
wrestling
in
most of the
itself
time.
is great. You want heat, but heat has always
Dominic
been, in
Mysterio
my
is a
view,
perfect example of that. Like that guy, nobody's looking at Dominic Mysterio and going, "Oh, that guy's going to beat Damian Priest in a fight." Like we all know Damian Priest is going to fucking mop the floor with that guy. But
yeah,
like,
with
but
that
I
mullet.
need the suspension of disbelief, and so like because he is so, I mean, just ripping off Eddie Guerrero wholesale. But hey, do it, do
Right.
you do you,
But
man?
here's the thing, though. He is ripping off Eddie Guerrero,
Yeah,
but he has conversations with Vicky. He talks to Chavo,
yeah.
and he gets this kind of consent, permission, rape. That's his quote, his kayfabe
I'm cool
father.
with it.
And oh, I
Keep
love
doing
it
it. Keep
because
doing
right
it.
now. So here's the thing about Heat. Heat, uh, you call it engagement. I call it's the frustration, the heat, the anger that you get from that the bad guy draws. Because usually it's the bad guy drawing the heat.
Usually.
Usually, which is why I define it the way I do. But engagement counts. That's accurate enough as well. And so that's what this episode is titled. And this is basically surrounding all the heat that wrestling and McMahon and the WWF are getting
Yep.
in this time frame post WrestleMania 1.
Which is very multifaceted, right?
Oh yeah.
Because yeah, because like he's stealing talent from all
Mm-hmm.
the different territories. He's got the feds interested in him now because like where are all these gigantic monstrous dudes? Why are they all sort of like Kurt Hennig was 210 pounds and now he's like 240 pounds. How did that happen?
Yeah.
And just like lots of him just acting as this is his first taste of like power, because he like really kind of mortgages the house and takes a real chance with WrestleMania, and it's a hit, right? And America
Yeah.
can't get enough, and
And
so like all of a sudden it's everywhere, and
it's
so
really
like
important for you to emphasize like take a moment and emphasize how big a deal it was for WrestleMania 1 to work.
Huge
It
risk.
had to work.
Huge risk. Nobody had ever done it before. The idea of pay-per-view was like a very brand new thing.
And this wasn't even pay-per-view. This was closed circuit.
A closed circuit. Yeah, thank you. Like only the really big, like Muhammad Ali and people like that could do closed circuit, but that was about it.
Yeah, if you weren't Frazier or Ali, closed circuit didn't apply to you.
Right.
Like, so closed circuit, different than pay-per-view, is imagine going to
a movie theater or something.
A movie theater and watching something on a screen. Mm-hmm. Or in this case, maybe a small arena, and having a screen built up, and instead of watching the live performance, you're watching
the scoreboard.
You're basically like paying the sports. It's like the sports bar where you watch the pay-per-view.
Yeah.
Minus the sports bar.
Yep. Yeah.
So that's closed circuit. That's different than pay-per-view. Pay-per-view will come later, and that's in the house.
But people legitimately had to like leave their fucking house and go somewhere to do that.
Yeah. So
So
we're looking at WrestleMania, post WrestleMania 1. You were touching on the steroid scandal. That's going to hit.
Yeah.
Leading into WrestleMania 2, because they're like, well, this worked, let's go. Because again, this was another genius move of Vince McMahon. He's like, well, baseball has an annual thing that they go towards, the World Series. And the NFL has this annual thing that they do, is the Super Bowl. So we, in professional wrestling, should have an annual thing that we build to, a season ender, if you will. And that's going to be WrestleMania. And that's what WrestleMania is. That's why it's the greatest stage of them all for professional wrestling.
It's still that way.
It is still this way. No matter how many wrestling companies you go, like wherever WrestleMania will be in Las Vegas for WrestleMania 41, just as WrestleMania approaches, look at how many non-WWE associated shows will be in Las Vegas.
Yeah, like
in and or around Las Vegas, Henderson County, whatever that is, they will all be there because wrestling will be there.
Even when I followed pretty closely for a long time, and then there was a point where, like post WCW folding, where I'm just like, this is fucking boring and I hate this shit, it's not interesting or inventive or any of those things, and went off and found, like ECW and stuff like that. And so I've sort of picked it up and put it down over the years, and now the ease of the presentation, but there was definitely ebbs and flows in terms of the popularity of WWE, but it was so you just could not escape it in the run up to WrestleMania. It was on MTV. And MTV was the coolest fucking thing in the world.
MTV was brand new, and you have to understand that MTV at that time, when MTV was a thing, back when it actually played music.
Yeah.
MTV actually meant something.
Yep.
And that's when you had the Cyndi Lauper involvement, because she was involved with MTV. And Vince had the, again, genius ideas like, hey, wrestling fans are watching wrestling.
Yep.
What if I was to take this person and have their fans watch my product because their person is here? That's when you involve Lauper. That's when you involve Ali. That's when you get involving Mr. T. And these people come in and bring their fandoms with them.
Yep.
And that leads to modern day, when you have Bad Bunny, when you have Fuck You Logan Paul, when you have these people involved in wrestling today.
Yeah.
That's why. That's why you get the celebrity come in and do a match or whatever, because they have a fan base. And if Bad Bunny is going to be the most downloaded, whatever, streamed artist or whatever, and Logan Paul's going to have this huge social media following, why not bring them into the fold? And it's like, oh, well, I love Logan Paul. I'll never say that sentence again. And feel free to buy the FLP shirt on on DejuanElhern.com/shop. I do have a Fuck Logan Paul shirt. Fuck you, Logan Paul. I challenge you to say some shit to me. You bitch. Not a fan of Logan Paul, never have been.
That's fair.
But I can objectively say that bringing in Logan Paul to professional wrestling was a good business move.
Yeah, brings
And it was a
different eyes.
good business move even back then in '88, when we're bringing in all of these different people from pop culture. Uh, Pretty quickly, we go into the lead up of WrestleMania 2 at the time when Jesse the Body Ventura is trying to unionize pro wrestling. I only want to
Right.
pause here for a moment because the unionization of pro wrestling has been an ongoing topic since then. It's a
Literally.
topic now. People are still discussing the unionization of professional wrestling. There's a lawsuit right now, if I have the right understanding, against Tony Khan and AEW uh, from the boys, the Dalton Castle boys, and I forget who else. There's another person involved in that. And they're basically disputing whether or not they were independent contractors or employees.
Yeah.
And if they're employees, then there's a wrongful termination.
Yep.
And so there's this lawsuit is current day. Like this is September 27th, 2024.
I got my fingers crossed that they do this.
I
So,
would love for there to be a wrestlers union.
yeah, me too.
Because you're looking at the big stars, your Becky Lynch's, your Roman Reigns's, your Cody Rhodes, your Swerve Strickland's, your Hangman Adam Page's, your Joe Hendry's. These guys are gonna get paid. Jordan Grace, because I love Jordan Grace. I'm gonna always talk about Jordan Grace if I can. These are major stars that are gonna get paid.
Yeah.
Regardless. But then you got the other guys. And while I don't think necessarily some rookie in NXT should get paid the same amount as Cody Rhodes, there does need to be some standardization.
Yeah.
So that we don't have these same stories of, well, I was doing the show leading into WrestleMania while sleeping in my car and eating ramen noodles for a month and a half. Like that should not be the conditions that any working person fair wages for everyone.
Yeah.
The WWE is doing some good work. We'll get into that later about the changes at this point in time to now as they've changed things with the wellness policies and all those kind of associated things. But at this point in time, none of that existed.
Right.
None of that existed. There were no protections for wrestlers who were working 200, 250, 300 days a year.
Yeah.
Because to do all this extra stuff, you had to spend extra time away from home, away from family, on the road, in the ring, doing all the stuff, taking the bumps. And that's a lot. And Jesse the Body Ventura was like, yo, we need to unionize.
Right.
And Vince was like, no.
Yeah. Well, of course, Vince is no, but like, this is my first opportunity to really say fuck you, Hulk Hogan, because Hulk Hogan totally sold out Jesse Ventura in terms of this. Like, if he had sat on that and Jesse Ventura, right before WrestleMania is like, well, Vince, we're going to have to go ahead and get everybody health care if you want us to go ahead and put on this pay-per-view, or whatever the fuck they were going to do,
Right.
And
well, they're doing WrestleMania. Yeah, they're doing WrestleMania too. So yeah.
Right. And so like, but Vince was able to go and just like to the main people, like he could go to the Hogans and I don't know, I don't remember the big stars. I'm sure Randy Savage, a few of the other
Orndorff,
Orndorff,
Piper,
King Kong Bundy, a few of the big ones, and just be like, well, you're gonna be here, right? Because I'm paying you a lot of fucking money, and and of course Hogan was gonna be there, and Hogan was the biggest star. So like, if you're gonna go against it, you're gonna go against the biggest guy, and people are gonna go be like, oh, wait, I don't understand what's going on. Like, why did Brutus the Barber Beefcake? No, that's not a good example because he would do whatever the fuck Hogan said. Why isn't Ken Orndorff or no Ken Patera, doing exactly what Hulk Hogan is saying, or Dino Bravo or one of those guys,
Yeah.
So, but like, since it's Hogan, what are you gonna do?
Right. And it was literally, according to the documentary, there was going to be a meeting, and they were going to get together and unionize in this meeting, and Hogan ratted him out.
Yep.
And Hogan went to Vince and like, yo, this is the loyalty we were talking about from episode one.
Yeah.
It's like, hey man, just want you to know that Jesse started some shit. And then so Vince was able to go and say, hey, if you go to this meeting, you're fired.
Yeah. Listen, brother, he's trying to step on my WrestleMania 2 payday, and I can't have that shit.
So you got WrestleMania 2, which was the dumb one from 3 different locations.
Yeah, I hated WrestleMania 2 is terrible.
WrestleMania 3 moves on. That's
the one that really starts everything, right? You know, like because like WrestleMania was definitely a risk, and WrestleMania 2 it was just like, oh well, we're gonna make it bigger and crazier, but they just realized, oh, this was a bad idea, right? But then 3, they're like, well, let's just go back to one location and let's sell a shitload of tickets, and then let's give them Andre and Hogan, and everybody will be happy. And they were. And they were.
Hogan hits the mainstream.
Yeah.
Mania 3 does the work. It sets the stage for what WrestleMania will become.
Forever. Yeah.
Hogan hits the mainstream. We got Hogan and Slaughter, which we're still doing the Iraqi war thing, Desert Storm in that period of time. Slaughter goes heel and is an Iraqi sympathizer.
Yeah.
Again with Sheik. But that's when they started to realize that the story was getting a little bit too hot.
Well, and like people are getting bored too, because like, you know, me, I always sort of hated Hulk Hogan. I was a Randy Savage guy from the fucking get-go. And my real guy, my favorite was Jake the Snake, and I was always so pissed that he never got like a title run, like a real title run. And so like I even back then, you know, I was just like, you know, Ric Flair makes good points. He is limousine driving, he is jet plane flying. I can't really make any arguments with any of these things he's saying, you know. And you find out what a piece of shit that guy is, you know, in real life. So it's just like, but hey,
this is the Ric Flair documentary.
You're a kid, you don't know. So
right, and there's a sense of innocence that goes along with that. But that's around the time that story gets a little bit too hot. They try to pull back, but they realize people are pulling away from Hogan, and then the steroid trial happens.
Yeah.
And
my absolute favorite moment of the documentary series is it's the steroid trial, and Hogan is testifying against Vince McMahon, and so they've got the picture of Vince McMahon in the neck brace and Hogan on the stand in a suit, right? And then like the judge or whatever, and I'm like, if this is not the most American thing I've ever seen in my entire fucking life, I don't know what is, right? I've been asking ever since that, you know, like I guess it's only been like 2 or 3 days or whatever, and I'm sure this is going to be something I can buy at some point, but I was like, I want a print of that reenactment, you know, because I'm just like, this is the end of America. This picture right here is this is when it turned, you know, this is where we're like, you know, America's done. America's done. This is it right here.
Just trade it in.
Yeah.
So this is about the point where we start getting into the steroid and the drug use, and Tony Atlas admits to the abuse of women in the backstage area.
Oh yeah.
And then, so there's a lot of things that are being criticized in the news, and it really does seem unfair because it always seems that when wrestling hit the mainstream news, whether it's on a TV report or in the newspaper, it was always about the negatives. No one cared about WrestleMania being a financial success. It's just a matter of, oh, so there's a steroid trial. Let's go deal with that. And we get introduced to this guy, Phil Mushnick.
Oh, Phil Mushnick, yeah.
We get introduced to Mushnick, and that's when he is the one, you know, he's discussing, he's got like a little column. He talks about when Snooka's girlfriend dies by accident. That was an accident where she
So there's only a few
Okay.
people that really come out looking good from this documentary, and
Meltzer.
I had forgotten all about Phil Mushnick, right? You know,
Yeah.
like I had forgotten how he went after Vince the entire fucking time, especially when it wasn't popular. Like when WWE was like the ratings juggernaut, right? And it's like number one through number five, you know, in like the cable ratings or whatever, you know, it's all WWE programming. And they're just making money hand over fist. And Phil Mushnick's like, this guy's a fucking piece of shit, you know? And I'm like, and I remember thinking at the time, going, why does he hate this guy so much? You know, because like at that point, I still didn't really have any context or like know any of the backstory or anything.
Because
And
kayfabe was held so tight. You
yeah,
weren't
right.
going to at that point. So
And
they kept so much to the chest, and it's surprising to even hear some of the stuff that gets like that's why Tony Atlas is my favorite part of this whole thing, because Tony Atlas was one of those
he's
old
great too.
school guys,
Yeah,
and he's just like, fuck all that shit. I'm gonna tell you everything.
yeah.
Kayfabe's
I mean,
dead to me now. I can tell you whatever now.
exactly. What do I
And
fucking care? It ain't making me any goddamn money anymore. So
right, and boy does he, because there
yeah.
is Mushnick gets into. We're talking about Mushnick now. This is the episode on Heat and all the
Mhm.
kind of bad publicity, for lack of a term,
Yep.
steroid use, the womanizing,
Yep.
uh, the Snooker's girlfriend passing away, and all the questions surrounding
Passing
that.
away. I'm doing air quotes
Um,
for the passing away.
and then of course there is the I did not know about this until the documentary. There was a sex scandal for the Ring Boys. It was a Ring Boys sex scandal. Did not know about that before the documentary.
Oh yeah.
Where where there was a guy who was like a management of the ring crew, the people who were in charge of putting the ring up, bringing the ring down,
Yep.
setting things up for the show. And apparently this guy would bring in these young teenagers, say, hey, you're a young, strapping young man, lad, come help us do the thing. Cheap
Yep.
labor sounds to me. I think it would sound that way to most anybody else, especially we're talking about late 80s, early 90s. And apparently this guy would sexually abuse these young boys. There was a
Yeah.
lawsuit with Tom Cole, and he implicated, of the names that were implicated, the name that stood out to me was Pat Patterson.
Of course. Yeah. I was gonna say like it had to be Patterson because like you know anybody that's that close to Vince has to be not great. Is
But
my
now
feeling.
he does maintain his innocence, and they say that the other two, Mel Phillips and Terry Garvin, that they were fired and they were dismissed and whatever in this lawsuit.
Mhm.
But Patterson, as we know, he left and came back more so for
Right.
optics, and it would later come out that, um, as far as they were concerned, Pat Patterson didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Then Tony Atlas would say, and this is like I told y'all, Tony Atlas tells he ain't holding nothing back.
Right. Right.
Tony Atlas accused, and I have to, we'll preface this as the accusation as laid out by Tony Atlas in this documentary. This has not come from either of us. Tony Atlas accuses Pat Patterson of touching him
Yep.
inappropriately,
Oh yeah.
uh, grabbing his wiener, I think is what he said.
Yep.
The producer asked uh, about complaining about Pat Patterson's behavior, and Tony Atlas fucking laughs.
Yeah.
He's like, complain to who? It's complaining to Vince McMahon. You're not going to complain to Vince McMahon. What's Vince going to do? This is
Pat's his
Vince's
right
dude.
hand man.
Right. And this stands out to me because this is laying groundwork for what we all know is
Right.
coming.
Yeah.
This is
So like
laying a foundation.
so here's the funny part, right? Is at this point, I don't think Vince is a great guy, right? But I don't think he's a monster, right? You know, I think he is a businessman that is very ruthless, right? And he understands what he wants and he does what he needs to get it, right? And so,
Right.
like, I'm not going to say that's good or bad, you know, like, there's been plenty of people that have been in that same circumstance and done the same thing, you know, and like, I still am probably not going to think really great things about Vince, But at this point, I don't hate Vince, right? I'm just like, he's a guy that brings me entertainment, right?
Right.
Like I don't really have any strong opinions on Vince McMahon at this point, and then
Right.
I think the steroid trial and then turning right into the Attitude Era right after that is where the turn happens.
Yeah, because let's be clear about the steroid trial. The steroid trial is one of those things where it's like this doctor gets hit, and he's accused of selling steroids
Yep.
illegally, like through prescriptions,
So he
and
starts
Vince
pointing
gets
fingers.
involved.
Yeah.
Right. So Vince gets involved because the accusation is, and when you're dealing with legal factors, you have to understand what is the actual accusation versus the actual law. Right, wrong, or indifferent, morals aside, objectively, what is the actual accusation compared to the actual law? And the accusation was that Vince was forcing the wrestlers to get um, steroids, to use
Right.
steroids. Now, could Vince suggest
Yeah.
using steroids?
Yeah.
That's not illegal.
Right.
Can Vince McMahon imply that maybe your body's not where he wants it to be for his product, and then you turn around and make the decision?
Right.
That's what actually happened, as according to the court case, um, as it laid out in this documentary. So when you look at Vince McMahon's involvement, Vince McMahon did not violate a law.
I
Did
agree with
not
that.
break the law.
I
So
agree.
since he didn't break the law, he was essentially acquitted.
Yep.
And as far as this particular lawsuit was concerned, steroids, don't get me wrong, he'll deal with steroids later on. But in this particular deal, what his actual actions were not a violation of the law as it was written. Therefore, he was considered acquitted and innocent of that. But
Yep.
that had nothing to do with the first female referee and the allegations of sexual assault.
Yeah.
That were laid upon him, and the complete dismissal by the news.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so, of course, when it comes to this lawsuit, my question to you is: to me, this reflects the state of the public view on women. Right? This goes beyond the ring. This is beyond women, because there weren't a whole lot of women in wrestling at this point, particularly in this particular role. But this was still in an era where if women complained about assault of any kind, they were just kind of like, meh. You had marital rape, I think, may have still been legal.
Oh, yeah.
Like the idea that the concept that your husband could rape, a husband could rape his wife, did not exist.
Right.
And I'm thankful that these are no longer standards; these are no longer acceptable. But at this time, this is the state of things. This is the state of the world at this time. And
I think
they chose not to. They just chose not to deal with it.
Yeah,
and they dismissed it.
I really feel like the steroid, because that was the government coming after Vince, right? That's not, that's like the federal government saying, we're going to come after you and send you to federal, pound you in the ass prison, as they say in, oh God, Office Space. And so I think after he gets off, which it was like, I don't know who, it seems like a publicity thing all the way around, where it's just like whoever was like the prosecutor is kind of like, oh, this will be good for my career later on down the line or whatever. But I can't imagine anybody, especially at this point in time, thinking that they were legitimately going to get Vince McMahon on steroid trafficking charges. It just seemed absurd,
like a witch hunt.
Yeah, like even as I think I was like 15 or 16 years old, and I'm like, I'm not gonna like convict him of this shit, I remember him being on Monday Night Raw, like seconds after the verdict was announced, and like Macho Man's like screaming, "Not guilty, not guilty!" Here I got my Macho Man. Here, I'll put my Macho Man hat on right now, and like I feel like that was what really emboldened Vince to become Mr. McMahon. Like
more or
that's
less.
yep, that's the term right there.
And then like you said, like this Rita, what was her actual name? Chatterton. Because she was known by Rita Marie on the show,
Mhm. Yeah.
uh, as a referee, but her name was Rita Chatterton, and I have a note here that for this particular situation, it, she sued, and they basically dismissed and do anything about it. Vince McMahon, she went on Geraldo
Yeah.
and did that, and we all know how Donahue and Geraldo were in the late 80s, early
Yeah,
90s.
that was
I gotta say nothing else. This was 94.
yeah.
Vince would sue Rita Marie and Geraldo for defamation,
Yep.
and um, he would later withdraw that lawsuit. In 2023, during the temporary lift of the statute of limitations for sexual offenses in New York, McMahon paid a multi-million-dollar settlement to Ms. Chatterton because there was a law in New York.
Oh
Someone
yeah.
passed it and it said like, "Hey, for a limited amount of time, we're going to allow you to. We're going to lift the sex limitations, and if you have something that's like been hanging out there and weren't in
Yeah.
a space, because mind you, at this point in time in history, um, women just weren't believed. No one
Right.
cared." And so it's like, hey, if you felt like that's how you was
Shit.
with your case, then we're going to open the doors for you to file your lawsuits now. She apparently did. He apparently settled. Um, but also in this period of time, this is when Hogan goes to WCW.
Yeah. So right. So like right after the steroid trial, Hogan jumped ship. And like so what I really like to remind people of when Hogan went to WCW is that it was a huge fucking failure right out of the gate, right? Because they brought him in and they're going to be like Hulkamania, right? And so they're just like, we're going to put him over Ric Flair, and like Ric Flair's the goddamn god of the promotion. Like it was like the first or second pay per view he's there. It might have been the first match he was in.
I think it was
You
his
know,
first match because they showed the signing of the contract of him
Yeah, it was.
and
Yeah,
Flair.
first match, right? And they just give Hogan the title, and you're just like, what? I was like, there's still, Flair's still here, Sting is still here, like there were other Sid. I can't remember if Sid was there the night, but like there were people, right?
Yeah,
And
I
everybody
think
was
Sid would
tired,
still be in WWE at that point. I don't know. I'm not really
probably.
sure. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, he jumped back and forth a lot during that time, but like, you know, it was super boring and everybody was tired as fuck of Hulkamania. And so like they sort of floundered for about a year of him signing that big contract, and they're just like, oh man, this is a terrible mistake that we made. And then Bash at the Beach, and
That's when we get into the NWO stuff.
yep,
That's Attitude Era stuff. We're not on the episode of Attitude. We're on the Screw Job episode 3.
yep,
Uh, so that episode ends with the cliffhanger of Hogan being told that, hey, you're going to testify against Vince McMahon,
yep,
and if you don't, we're coming after you.
yep,
So he's like, all right, fine, I'll testify, I'll go on the stand, but he doesn't sell him out. And it's in that testimony that, as we already covered, he's like, well, Vince didn't make us do anything. The
right,
boys did it. He
right,
used it. Because mind you, at a period of time of this, in its usage, steroids illegal.
yep,
Steroids illegal. It was the way they were being sold that was illegal. And then
yep,
they got reclassified during the war on drugs. But Hogan's like, they didn't force us to do anything.
yep.
So that's how he got out of that. But episode 3 starts off with Wendy Richter versus the Spider,
Oh
right?
god, I remember
For
I
the win
remember
for the ladies championship.
I remember watching that episode live, and thinking
And
like I was just like, who the fuck is like? the spider, and you're just like, this is weird, and I don't get it. And then like the it just shows the pattern, right? Of
Yeah.
what's going to
So
happen.
this establishes the screw job, right? We all know of the infamous screw job, but before that screw job was this screw job,
Yep.
and it's the same thing. Wendy, they wanted her to drop the belt. She said no, and Ben said, "Yeah,
Oh, that's not even the whole story. So Wendy Richter said, "I want more money," right? And Vince is like, why would I want to pay you fucking more money? We have one women's wrestling match every, 8 weeks
year
or
and a half."
something like that. Yeah, well, you're not worth it. And so, and she talks about how she knew that the fucking fix was in. Like Moolah was there that day, and she's like, Moolah never shows up unless Moolah was on the card, and like all these different things. And so I'm just like, poor Wendy Richter. I really did feel for Wendy Richter because she did kind of get fucked over for sure.
And that was one of those things where wrestling gets real,
Yep.
and the frustration is real, the anger is real, the emotion is real, the actions are real,
And then you learn
and
about how Moolah is in real life, like after that, and you're like, oh, double fuck you.
yeah,
So it's like,
because they even named a battle royal after Moolah,
oh
and
yeah,
then didn't.
yeah. I loved that actually, where they were like, oh, it's the Mae Young Battle Royal, and people were like, or no, I'm sorry, the Moolah Battle Royal, and they're like, fuck Fabulous Moolah, she's a piece
They're
of
like,
shit, and it's like, oh,
maybe we shouldn't do that then.
yeah, let's. Oh, I guess the temperatures changed a little.
Yeah, but then, but the Mae Young Classic is still a great women's tournament, and I would
Oh
love for
yeah,
them to bring back the Mae Young Classic. Hey, WWE, bring back the Mae Young Classic. Um, there are so many great female wrestlers in the world. You have so many great female wrestlers on your roster right now, but with your connection of AEW, and fuck it, send an invitation to Tony Khan. Bring some of them in. Bring
sure,
Willow Nightingale in.
yeah.
Bring a DMD. Bring her in. Bring Jamie Hayter in. Bring Mariah May in. Use that connection to get a Mae Young Classic. 32 amazing female wrestlers. Take every dollar I own and then some. I'll pay you next week.
They should
Um,
they should have a women only show. I've said this for a long
Evolution
time.
2.
No, a weekly show. Like
Oh,
fuck
just solely women?
yeah, I was. They should have like the women should get quarterly big like pay-per-views like the men do, right?
There should be, well, with the new structure of things, I would disagree. Only
Yeah, I mean
because they
now
have
it seems
changed the
like it's
structure.
right.
They've
Now it
changed the
seems a lot
structure
right,
where like your pay-per-views in WWE are only like they're like 5 matches long.
right.
And it's not even all the big storylines. The major male storylines are getting early payoffs too. So I think that they're still putting um, Liv and Rhea highlighting everything. Belair is still on top,
And they have
and they're
like
still doing
10
a lot.
women in NXT that are ready to make the huge step. Roxana
They
Perez
are
for sure, but like there's a bunch of Lola, what's her name? Lola Vice?
full of ice.
Yeah. There's a few
I'm
where I'm just like,
I'm
why
all
are they
about Jada Parker. I'm all
yeah.
about Jada Parker. Jada Parker is ready.
What is her name? Soul Ruka or
So
something?
Ruka, listen,
Yeah.
listen.
So fun.
Side note to everything else we're talking about. Soul Ruka has one of the best finishes in wrestling.
Yeah.
That
And
Soul
so
Snatcher is. I'm a huge fan of the cutter. I love the cutter in all of its forms. That is the world's best cutter. I'm sorry, Randy Orton. Soul Ruka has the best cutter. I don't. Sorry,
I
not sorry. It's
that's
the best
fine.
cutter. It's
I
the.
don't hate that take or anything like
I
that.
mean, the RKO is a literal work of art.
Mm.
But when
Out
Soul
of
Ruka did that,
nowhere.
when she does that soul snatcher off the ropes versus the
Mm.
corner,
Yep.
just hang it up. Just, like an old coat, just hang that shit up, man. It's
Yep.
just it's chef's kiss. Screw job. So we get into they
Got a
get
little
into, because
sidetracked.
I can talk about Soul Ruka and women's wrestling all day. I'm a huge fan of women's wrestling. Um, we get into the Vince McMahon stuff and the close of that trial, but then we go into, like you had mentioned, Hogan getting boring
Yeah.
and people being bored by Hogan, and so they tried to get a new face of the company. They tried Lex Luger, and that didn't work. And so you had the new generation of wrestling. This was the era before the Attitude Era, where you had your Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Taker, Nash,
Yep.
Razor, and they kind of lean on Hart. Like we said, there's no argument there. Hart
Oh
was the guy.
yeah. I mean, he was the guy at that
Hart was the guy.
time. Of that era, I don't think that there's any question that he was the guy. And like I liked Bret Hart as a face. I liked Bret Hart as a heel.
Hart
And I
Foundation stuff was great.
yeah, all of it. I think it was
There's,
all real fun, and like
yeah,
him, like I remember the whole he made a promo about how like he'd been a babyface for a long time and then he went away and he came back and he was like, I'm coming back to the WWE and I'm bringing a shovel with me, and I'm just like, yeah, there you go. Because like
and
he was the guy, like he was the guy that I never questioned. He reminds me of Brian Danielson a lot, in this respect of like he was not the biggest guy, but
right,
I was never questioning that Bret Hart could take out Diesel. No, that was of course
right,
he
yeah,
could,
yeah,
absolutely he
obviously, yeah.
could. Yeah, he was the guy. He could go.
And
He's
you have to
like
understand that the equivalent would be Bret Hart was Roman Reigns. And I say
mm,
that if you were going to compare the Hart Foundation to the Bloodline,
it's very
because
similar in
it's
the
yeah,
whole thing.
because the beauty of the Bloodline, what makes the Bloodline work is that they're all legitimately related.
Yeah.
And what made the Hart Foundation work is they're all legitimately related.
Mm-hmm.
So there was that understood it like, hey, it's not like two guys like who just came in the business together like an
Right.
Edge and Christian, or even like DIY with Tommaso and Gargano.
Yep.
It's like shit, sure they're good best friends, but when they go against each other, it's whatever.
Right.
No, but when Bret Hart fights Owen Hart, that's a real brother fighting a real brother.
Yep.
And that was far more entertaining than the Usos against each other. No, no diss to the
Oh, it
Usos,
was
but
so. Oh my god! Like I was
Usos
always.
versus Uso or Hardy versus Hardy,
Oh
those
yeah,
matches do
no,
not compare to
not even
WrestleMania
close.
10 Hart versus Hart.
I was always so mad Owen didn't get a run as the champ. I always felt like he should have like knocked off Brett after WrestleMania because like they had that WrestleMania where it's like, oh, we're both having two matches or whatever. Like
Yeah,
um, Owen was it was the curtain jerker, which was like the best opening match of a WrestleMania ever. Like I think it was the best match of the whole card. Is the Owen Hart, Bret Hart that opens the show, and then they had I don't even remember who Luger faced, Macho Man or somebody. I don't even remember.
oh, I could. That most of that card is a blur.
And then
If
it
it
was
wasn't
like,
Hart or Michaels, I don't even remember it for
and
the
then
most
they
part.
both wrestle Yokozuna afterwards, and like they sort of just were like, "Oh, I guess we're done with Lex Luger," like that's a done. We're done with that thing. And then,
Oh yeah, because the Royal Rumble win, the double
yeah, oh
double
yeah,
Rumble.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was
That's
trying to
what that was.
remember
It was a
why it
double
was
Rumble win.
that way exactly.
Yeah,
And
that's
then
what that was. I
and then
forgot about that.
Brett wins the title at the end of the night, in the main event, which I love that like Owen beats him legitimately in a match at the very beginning of the night, and then like Brett goes over as the champ at the end of the night, and then like to me. Put Owen over the very next night. Be like, you know what, fucker? I just beat you last night. I'm gonna fucking do it again,
But
and we're gonna
again,
do it for the title.
babyface the face of the company, so Owen Hart,
Yeah, oh,
Bret
yeah.
Hart. And so now this is a point in time where we have WCW starting to really be a competition for WWE.
And they're starting to
And
blur the lines, right? Like
yeah,
ECW existed at this point, WCW existed at this point, and they had already brought in Nash and Hall as the outsiders. So they're trying to like say, Yeah, wrestling is wrestling,
Well, that
but
hadn't
like,
happened just yet, but that's happening in this episode. But
yeah.
yeah, we're in that era. So this is before that, where we have
We are a
the
smidge before
guaranteed
that.
contracts
Yeah,
and the creative freedom and
the screw job. We
the
haven't
head to
talked
head.
about the screw job yet.
No, we're getting to that one, but we got the head to head time slot. This is when
Yeah.
Bischoff gets Nitro,
Yep.
right? Luger jumps ship, um, and he tries to do things differently than WWE. WWE tries to respond with the billionaire Ted skits. USA puts the kibosh on that. And now we get to the infamous curtain call where Bret Hart says they killed wrestling that day.
No, come on, Brett.
Bret Hart said, that's his quote. I wrote it down.
I know.
They killed wrestling that day.
I know.
If you're watching this as a wrestling fan, you know the curtain call. Long story short, good guys, bad guys in the ring, same time having raising each other's hand because it's Nash and Hall going to WCW. Sean's champ. H is just there. H is just there. Triple H is just there.
Yeah. But they were baby faces and heels, and they legitimately, I think it was Sean and Nash had a match right before that.
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh my God, Shawn Michaels the face is hugging Kevin Nash the heel. I don't understand what's going on,
And it could have been settled. It's one of those things that in retrospect you're like, how could you have fixed this to make it work? And it could have just been like, hey, one last match, you and me, and we settle it. We call it, settle it, put it to bed, and then at the end of that, like we do, two grown men at the end of a big fight, we just get up, shake hands, have a drink, and that would have sold it all.
Yeah, I 100% believe, because they all kind of tell the story that they ran this past Vince beforehand. And he's like, what the fuck do I care? It's a house show.
Vince admitted it. He's like, yeah, they ran it by me, but I didn't quite get what they were doing.
Well, it was a house show, so he didn't ever think it was going to come back to bite him, right?
Yeah, no one cared because it was a house show.
Right. There
untelevised.
Right. It was not going to be televised, so it was just going to be like, oh, they're all friends, or whatever, whatever. But that's not what happened, and so this goes into all sorts of stuff. But I'll let you got the notes there. Where are we at?
Yeah, I am. So yeah, we're gonna breeze through it. So when it comes to this backlash, there are 4 people involved, but only one can be punished.
Yep.
Scott and Nash are gone. Shawn Michaels is champ.
Yep.
So as this story has been told to death ad nauseum, Triple H was the last one. He was the only one. He was kind of the rookie-ish of the 4. So he was the only one who could be punished. This leads into the King of the Ring that he was supposed to win that he didn't. We're going to put a little pause on that until the next one.
Your Psalms and your John 3:16.
We're going to hold on to that one because I think Austin talks about that into the Attitude Era.
Yeah.
But so that's when we have Nash and Hall go into WCW to become the outsiders. There's a lawsuit for infringement. So if you watch that story, they don't say Razor Ramon and Diesel. They don't say their names at all.
No.
And they do that to avoid it, to create that mystique. But since they're still portraying the characters, at least, Vince McMahon and the WWF had an infringement lawsuit, which leads to the episode, can you tell us, do you work for the other guy? And Hall and Nash have to say, no, we don't.
Right.
Just so they can get out of that lawsuit. And then that leads into Bash at the Beach. That leads to the NWO. And almost like a year and a half, almost 2 years of WCW kicking the WWF's ass.
Yep.
This leads into the changes that are happening in WWF. And Bret decides to leave.
Yep.
And this leads to November 1997. We are not going to talk about the details of the screw job because everyone has talked about the details of the screw job. We're just going to talk about it in context. Bret remembers what happened to Richter.
Mm-hmm.
And Bret essentially didn't want to lose the title Okay, depending on who you ask, he didn't want to lose it to Sean.
Yeah.
Or didn't want to lose it in Canada. I've heard both stories. Doesn't ultimately matter. It's time for you to drop the belt. It's time for you to drop the belt.
Yeah.
Now, do I think they could have done Brett a solid? Sure. I heard the story that Brett was like, I totally would have agreed to win the title at Survivor Series and drop it on Monday Night Raw.
Yep.
But he didn't. Didn't get the opportunity to do that.
Yep.
I like it now. And so that's where we are. The screw drop happens. It's the sharpshooter doesn't get reversed. Sean's declared the winner, and Brett is pissed.
And Mr. McMahon is born.
Mr. McMahon is born on Monday Night Raw after that with
Yep.
the Brett screwed Brett. And
Brett
that leads
screwed
us
Brett.
all into episode 4, Attitude Era.